couple of months ago on a day when I was simply asking my cards if there were any messages they had for me. I received a calling to manifest something I desired, or I guess, thought I desired. Ever since I was a kid, I've always experienced what you'd consider otherworldly beings, spirits, angels, whatever your preferred term may be. There's been all kinds of experiences, scary ones, funny ones, good ones, great ones, etc. They're not consistent, but they've happened plenty of times over my life. I'm in my mid-20s now. So on that day, I decided to ask my guides something along the lines of this. If the power for mediumship is within me, I ask that it becomes more prevalent in my life. I did my own little routine that has been taught down the line of my Balkan family. Later that night, I was watching TV downstairs with my roommates. I had to pee as one does, so I started up the stairs to my bathroom. One of my roomies yelled out a question. I stopped, naturally looked back down the stairs. I was frozen for a moment when I saw the scariest spirit I've ever seen. A woman in all black, drapey clothes, long hair covering most of her face, just staring at me from the bottom of the stairs. I didn't even answer my roommates. I began backing up the stairs quickly, turned around once again, and there she was, closer this time. A feeling of dread came over me. I'm not joking when I say I ran to my bathroom, slammed the door shut. I called one of my roommates downstairs to come get me. That night, as I was falling asleep, I heard my name being whispered. Let's just say I didn't sleep that night. I do all my practices during the day. It's just how it's always been and what feels right. The next morning, I reversed that asking of mine, did one of my familiar house cleansing practices. I haven't heard or seen anything since. I'm worried that I may have completely closed off this previous ability of mine. I guess what I'm so curious about is if anyone thinks that this was a dark entity, a lost soul, or anything else. I still question it to this day. Had I accidentally lowered a veil, made myself more vulnerable? Let me know your thoughts. This happened to me in the early 2010s, and admittedly did not happen on the Navajo reservation, but it did take place on another reservation nearby. One night, me and a friend were chilling at his house, playing games, and decided to go out for some late-night food. Being that it was past midnight, the only option was the 24-hour McDonald's. After getting our food, we decided to just cruise around the back roads for fun. The area that we were driving wasn't well known to us since we were driving on another tribe's land, but my friend had a general sense of where we were going. The road we were on led us out into the middle of nowhere. We finally stopped and pulled over on top of this big mesa where the road went down like in a snake pattern. As I said, it was nighttime, but you could still see a long way off in the distance from our little vantage point, including house lights in the distance where the road led. After getting out of the car, I walked closer to the edge of this overlook point, started howling and screaming to hear my echo. I did that for a few minutes before I walked to the very edge and looked down. I saw a light from a window just below me, close enough to where I could have thrown a stone and hit it. I distinctly remember the light looking like it was from a candle with the flickering, but definitely wasn't dim like a candle would be. I also recall that the windowsill portion was made of stone and looked like an adobe house. Since I was higher up and at an angle, I couldn't see inside the window. I couldn't make out what the house looked like in general. All I saw was a light coming from a window. At that point, I turned to my friend and said something like, "Dude, there's a house just right there." As I pointed to it, "We better get out of here before they call the cops on us for screaming." My friend looked over and saw the light from the window too. He laughed and agreed. We both got in his car and split. Nothing spooky or creepy even crossed my mind that night, just that I may have scared someone in their house with my screaming. A few weeks later, me and the same friend went cruising around again, but this time during the day. We visited the same area, pulled over to look at the view. I went back to the edge of the mesa, looked over, but to my surprise, there was nothing there. Not only was there no sign of the house, but a house couldn't have been built there in the first place. It was way too steep, rocky, just boulders, sand, and weeds. I relayed this info to my friend, and he looked over the edge too. That's when we were both like, what the fuck did we see that night then? My story ends years later when I meet and befriend a coworker who lived and grew up on the reservation where the mesa overlook was. We began trading scary stories. That guy has some crazy shit that he's experienced out there. And I told him about seeing the adobe house at night that wasn't there in the daytime. He laughed and said something like, "Dude, you saw the witch house." I asked him to explain, and he said that the area that I was in was known for being a spot that people stay away from at night. Apparently, these witches hang out there now and then, and there's a small adobe house on that cliffside, but it's very small, like something your average person would have to crawl into. He doesn't know much more than that, but says he knew plenty of stories of people seeing it lit up at night. So that's my true story about seeing a possible witch house. Just like how skinwalkers are Navajo witches, there's other similar witches for other tribes. I don't know the name given to that one that I saw, but it's a cool little story to have in my pocket. My cousin and I have always been close. We've been tight ever since we were kids. At one point in my life, when I was around 9 years old, my family had moved in with his family in their upstairs apartment in Montebello, California. It was a pretty great time in my childhood because I'm the youngest out of my siblings. Me and my cousin are around the same age. I finally had someone my age to play with. My cousin has 2 older siblings and a little brother who was around 3 or 4 at the time. So having someone to play with his age was also great for my cousin too. The first couple of nights that we spent over there were pretty normal. We woke up, got ready for school, came home, did our homework, ate dinner. We'd play for a little bit and then go to bed. Whenever we would play after dinner, I noticed that my youngest cousin was also playing in the front room by himself, but having full-blown conversations with himself. I asked my cousin, "Who's he talking to?" And my cousin responded with, "Yeah, I don't know, man. He keeps telling everybody that he has an imaginary friend named Gilbert. My mom says it's just a phase he's going through." We didn't think nothing of it. Me and my cousin would just continue to play. Him being 3 years old and us being 9 years old, we would play with him whenever we could, but the age difference would always get in the way. Me and my cousin wanted to play with action figures. My little cousin wanted to play act like a puppy. It's just the nature of being a 3-year-old. Things started to take a turn when me and my cousin would notice that some of the toys that we would put away because they were our favorites would always be misplaced, or not in the same position we would leave them. We always thought it was weird. One night after dinner, me and my cousin decided that we were going to take our action figures and play by the kitchen table. Little did we know that we were about to experience together something that we would remember for the rest of our lives. I remember grabbing all of our Marvel action figures together and bringing them over by the kitchen table. My cousin shouts, "I want to play Wolverine." And I respond with, "Okay, I'm going to play Spider-Man." And just as 9-year-old kids do, we let our imagination take over. We begin playing with our action figures. In the middle of our role-playing, my little cousin comes up to us and asks if we want to play hide-and-seek with him. My cousin told him, "No, we're going to play with our toys, but you can play with us if you want to." I remember after my cousin said no, my little cousin stood there looking at us. Then he turned to his side and said, "See, I told you they don't want to play." Me and my cousin looked at each other, like he was crazy. I said to him, "Who are you talking to?" My little cousin responded with, "I'm talking to my friend Gilbert. He wants to play hide and seek. He doesn't like it when you guys say no." I remember laughing. I'm telling my little cousin, "Well, tell your friend Gilbert, we don't want to play with him." My little cousin just looked at us one more time and walked away. Me and my other cousin laughed it off and continued to play with our toys. As we were playing with our toys, me and my cousin started to hear noises coming from the kitchen. We both looked at each other with the facial expression that described without saying words, "Did you hear that?" And while looking at one another, simultaneously, we both shrugged and continued to play. Once we started playing again, we hear what sounds like dishes in the dish rack shaking, as if something was vibrating them. We both look at each other again. Both of our facial expressions are the same. We are both looking at each other like, what the hell is going on in the kitchen? So we put our toys down. We peek our heads into the kitchen area, and as we do, we can see the dish rack shaking uncontrollably. I remember feeling confused and thinking to myself, why is it shaking like that? As me and my cousin are both looking at the dish rack shake for no reason, we both see a butter knife suddenly rise out of the dish rack, hover in the air for a second, then tossed in our direction onto the floor. Me and my cousin are now both looking at this butter knife on the floor, about 2 feet away from us. We both look at each other, and I say to him, "Did you just see that?" And he responds with, "Yep." Then my cousin decides to tell me about all these conversations, the ones he's been overhearing between his mom and his stepdad, about all the weird things that have been happening around his apartment, how they both feel that Gilbert is a spirit that's been following my little cousin. Then he told me a few nights ago, before we moved into his apartment, him and his older sister were in their room, the one that they share. They were watching TV, and all of a sudden, they could hear footsteps in their hallway. He said that him and his older sister were the only ones awake, and every time they would open up their door to look out into the hallway, they wouldn't see anyone. He said that they went back and continued to watch TV with the door shut. Then, again, all of a sudden they hear the footsteps charging in the direction of their room in the hallway. And as soon as it got close to their door, boom, the door burst open. They could hear footsteps running away. As we got older, we were both in our 20s. Me and my cousin got drunk together one night. It was pretty close to a holiday. We were both discussing our experiences that we had with other family members, including my grandma. My grandmother still lives in the same apartment complex, but downstairs to where my cousins used to live. She's been there so long that she's very good friends with the owner of the apartments. My grandmother decides to tell us, finally admits to us, that my younger cousin's friend, Gilbert, was anything but imaginary. Both my grandmother and grandfather claimed to have actually seen him. She described him as a boy with a somewhat of a bowl haircut, wearing old-fashioned clothes, such as a button-up long sleeve, with the sleeves rolled up, trousers, suspenders. She told us the night that she first saw him, she knew it wasn't normal. So she contacted the owner of the apartments and explained to him what she'd seen and experienced. She said the owner had admitted that a family had once lived in the upper apartments, where my cousin used to live, a very long time ago, when the apartments were first built. He'd told her that the family's youngest son had passed away upstairs. He's not exactly sure about the specifics of the situation. He said the little boy's name was Gilbert. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I've always been fairly in tune with the supernatural. My first memorable experience happened when I was with my cousin Kay. We were only 7. Kay and I went to an older cousin's birthday party. Her name is Kat. She was turning 12. It was a gorgeous June day, the perfect time to enjoy a nice summer breeze. Cat's party was at Duncan Park in Natchez, Mississippi. While this park had its usual picnic tables and playground equipment, it was surrounded by weeping willows, which aren't that uncommon to find in this part of Mississippi. However, unlike other parks, this one was sitting right next to an old plantation house, an abandoned YMCA that closed down in the 70s, and the front of an old locomotive that the city was forced to fence off because people like my aunt had defaced it in their youth. My cousin Kay and I ran around the park while waiting for the rest of our family to show up and enjoy the festivities. That's when we saw them. 2 women dressed in pastel, lacy dresses with bell skirts and bonnets, the style resembling that of the Civil War era. However, in our 7 or 8-year-old brains, they were dressed like Barbie princesses. So we followed. We still had that childlike naiveness when it came to stranger danger. They walked up the steps to the front porch of the Greek Revival-style home, where we saw a few men in tailcoats, adorned with top hats and what looked to be afternoon tea set up on a table. My cousin and I watched at a distance, at first completely entranced by the scene in front of us. It was like something out of a fairy tale. We got a bit closer. I remember we were going to ask them something. What were we going to ask them? I don't remember. I do remember that as soon as the word "hey" came out of our mouths, the ladies in dresses, the gentlemen in suits, stopped what they were doing and floated through the walls of the house, disappearing completely. My cousin and I stood there, looked at each other for a few minutes in disbelief at what we'd just witnessed. Kay and I came to a silent understanding that no one would believe us, since we were just children. We would have been written off as having overactive imaginations. We went back to Cat's party like everything was normal. Didn't utter a word of what had just happened to anyone. Fast forward to when we were teens. We finally told my mom what we'd experienced all those years ago. My mom told us that the Auburn plantation had reenactments in the spring. So what we must have seen was former residents enjoying the summer breeze like they were still amongst the living. This story may be hard to believe, especially since I don't have the photo at hand, but I promise I'm telling the truth. When I was a kid, I went on a church service trip to New Orleans. Our aim was to help clean up remaining damages from when Katrina hit. About midway into our trip, we helped remove brush and debris from some old plot of land so that a playground could be built. We were all ecstatic because the day was incredibly productive, and we really believed that the spiritual forces of good, godliness were at work through us. That night, we visited Bourbon Street to have dinner, listen to some live music, and celebrate the work that had been done. At some point, one of the church leaders was taking pictures and pointed her camera to the sky, facing a distant casino. The sky was clear, no clouds. She snapped a photo, and when the screen displayed her photo, there was a silver-looking face, smiling heinously, while clasping his hands, protecting the casino. His face seemed metallic with many wrinkles. If you can imagine the Heath Ledger Joker, but without eyes, a huge mouth, no teeth, and many wrinkles, like fabric being pulled in multiple directions. That's what it looked like. It had wet-looking orange hair that draped about midway down its face. Its nose was half missing. The entire group went hysterical when they all looked at the photo, and the rest of the night, we were disturbed. The joy that we had felt all day instantly went away. Few of us slept. I had a variety of hallucinations in the dark, of demons falling into me. I didn't get any sleep. There were a few girls in the room next to me who I could hear crying in terror about what had just taken place. I say all of this to illustrate how the incident felt like a direct, successful attempt to hijack our spirits of positive energy. One person in the group tried to come up with multiple natural explanations for the incident, but the leader who took the photo always had new details to explain how there wasn't a natural explanation for what had taken place. This incident alone has been enough to keep my agnostic ass alert and aware of all possibilities. I'm a 28-year-old male, but this happened when I was just 15. I loved smoking weed back then, so I was basically smoking with my friends every day. I grew up in the UK, and my town was pretty big, with a population of nearly 100,000. The place I lived was like an estate full of houses. I had a best friend at the time who lived about a 20 to 25-minute walk from my house, but in order to get there, you had to walk through a wooded area that led to a big lake that you could walk around to get near his house. So one day, randomly, I was out with my friend who I just mentioned, plus many others, when we noticed a lot of police presence in the area, near the woods. Plus, there was a police helicopter in the air. Being curious, we followed the police to the woodlands that separated our houses. We went through the woods to the lake where the police and ambulance workers were, along with many bystanders at this point. We got there and started asking people we knew what happened. We were told that a young boy around the age of 7 had drowned in the lake, near the path where everyone was gathering. Over the next couple of days, police were trawling the lake, looking for the child. They knew he was there because his friend had ran for help when he fell in and couldn't get out. 2 or 3 days after he slipped in, the authorities found the young boy's body, which was big news in my town. No later than 24 hours after the boy was found, the local council installed a black metal bench on the footpath near where he had died, with a little plaque commemorating his life. Okay, so that very next day, I was out with my friend over near where I lived. We were getting high with a bunch of other friends that we knew. By the time we were done getting high, we decided to go back to his house to sleep, because my mom would have gone crazy over the fact that we were high. We started to walk back to his house at around 11 p.m. It was really dark out. We passed my house and eventually got to the woods. We walked through the woods and got to the start of the lake. We started walking down the side of the lake, down the path towards where the kid had drowned and the bench was. We were just talking nonsense as high teens did, when I noticed that there was a man sitting on the bench. Now, I was a little bit freaked out by this, but I didn't say anything yet. It was 11 p.m. near the woods in the dark. It was creepy, but when I got a little closer, I noticed that I could see what the man was wearing. He was dressed as a priest. You know, black jacket, white collar. Upon seeing the priest, I sighed some relief because I just presumed he was praying or something. Most likely for the kid that had drowned in that spot 4 days earlier. So after noticing this priest, I just watched him sit there as I got closer and closer. I didn't say anything to my friend who was right next to me, but we collectively stopped talking once we noticed the man. As we got closer, it was more obvious that he was a priest. And then, once we got within 5 meters, he was gone. I felt like I blinked and he just disappeared. When we were walking past the actual bench where I'd seen him, there was nobody there. But if he was to have just gotten up and walked away, I'd have seen him. It's a one-way track. After I got to the bench, I turned to my friend, who was just as confused and spooked as I was. I asked him if he'd just seen that man that sat on the bench. I didn't want to say what type of man because the way he was dressed was very obvious as to what type of man he was. But as I asked him, "Did you see that man that sat on the bench?" he said, "Yeah, the guy dressed like a priest." When I tell you my heart sunk, I can't explain that feeling or that situation to this day. What gets me is I purposely asked my friend if he'd seen the man. He corrected me by saying the priest. If it was a person, they'd have to get up and walk away from us in a straight line down the path, which we'd have seen, or they'd have to walk past us. So this happened maybe 2 years ago. But one time, my older sister and I were sharing a room while living with some family members. One night, I was trying to sleep while my sister was on her phone. As I was trying to sleep, I kept hearing seagulls, and I kept thinking, oh my God, why won't she change the TikTok? Finally, I was upset to the point that I sat up, told her to turn it down. She looks at me with wide eyes and says, I thought that was you. My eyes go wide, and I thought, what the fuck? Well, Sis texted one of our guardians because their room was across from ours. Then, my sister and I walked into the hallway to talk to said guardian. I was ahead of Sis and realized, wait, that's coming from the end of the hall, in the bathroom. I told Sis, then started to walk that way. When I got close to the bathroom, I felt this surge of panic, so I quickly turned around, bumped into my sis, and we both ran back to our room. Well, one of our guardians came and checked on what we were doing because we were loud. Then we told them what happened, and one of our brothers came down to see what the seagull noise was. Turns out it was a toy my littlest brother had, but the only way to turn it on was to push a button. We were too scared to go in there, to turn it off. Well, thankfully, one of the grown-ups did. But then later in the night, it went off again. Then the next day, when my sis and brother were home alone, it went off again. Finally, my brother put it outside in the snow. This was only one of many paranormal experiences I've had. So I used to live in a small town in rural Canada. There was this old folks' home for the mentally unwell that was closed a long time before I moved there. During the day, people would go to the property and hang out in the well-kept grass and trees. The town still took care of the surrounding grounds for this specific reason. The actual building was locked up, but teenagers would break into the building to basically scare themselves, myself included on a few occasions. Usually with 5 or so people, a little bit drunk or a little high, but even stone cold sober, it was lots of fun, probably due to feeling somewhat safe in numbers. And literally nothing actually happened that couldn't be easily explained with logic, noises, papers shifting, etc. Inevitably, the large group of teens that we would make too much noise, and the cops would get called. One night, me and my best friend, whom is a serious skeptic, decided to break or get into one of the parts of the building that no one had gotten into before. This time, just the two of us, because the more people you bring, the more likely the police are to show up, mainly due to a disturbance being called in by someone living across the property. We've had to book it from cops before, and we didn't want to tonight, especially if we were going to find a place that no one had ever been before, where we didn't know the exits. To get an idea of what it looked like, 5 stories tall, with the 4th and 5th stories making a slight tower jutting from the middle. Old brick in the front. Modern cement blocks that were painted over, like in schools. At the back, that's where you could tell that stuff was added in later years. The newer parts of the building had been broken into by kids a lot, but the main building had thick metal doors, and the windows that might be able to be opened were on the 3rd story. The whole thing looked like an old school, church, asylum, all cobbled together. There were other little structures around the main building, pool house, gymnasium, all ransacked by us idiots. Not the main floor of the old building, though. We climbed on the roof of the boiler room at the back of the building. We did this by piling up furniture debris we found in one of the ransacked storage buildings behind the main building. We pulled off one of the plywood covers nailed over a hole in the roof for a skylight or a missing vent, not sure. That led into the boiler room. We used the pipes along the ceiling and walls to climb down. This part of the building still looked semi-modern. You could tell that it was added closer to when it had closed. There was an exit that only opened from the inside, so at least leaving would be easy if needed. Me and my buddy are pumped at this point. The pipes made it easy to get down and everything was going good as it could. We make our way to the back of the room. We find the door leading to the untouched main floor of the building. We're half expecting the door to be locked like all of the other thick metal ones. But it opened with a real achy creak, loud against the silence. The door opened to the middle of a hallway, leading left or right. First thing we noticed, dust everywhere. It had made a 1/4 inch of film on everything. We both went right, as it led into an interesting-looking main area with sheet-covered furniture. We used our phone screens as light, took a couple of steps into the main room, and it hit me like a train. I'll try my best to phrase this understandably. All of a sudden, I feel sick. Not throw-up sick, but I'm gonna die sick. Like my brain said, run, leave, escape, now. I started shaking for no reason. It was so jarring. If I had to compare it to something, it felt like someone was right behind me with the intent to end me. It was weird because of how sudden it was, like a switch went off. I was excited and positive right up until that point, and then I was convinced we were about to get jumped or murdered. I looked at my buddy, and his face had the same expression of what I felt. Genuinely terrified, white as a ghost. I think that might have scared me even more, honestly, because I've never seen him like that. Neither of us saw anything at this point. No ghost, no distinct noises after the door creak, no creepy dolls or skeletons, just thick dust, sheet-covered furniture. It made no sense that I felt so threatened, and looking at my friend, I knew he felt it too. Without saying a word to each other, we turn our heads and walk toward the boiler room. We didn't tell each other that either one of us wanted to go. We just started backtracking faster than we came in. I'm leading us at this point, and my blood ran ice cold when I noticed something on the other side of the door we left open. A set of fresh-looking footprints that led down the left route of the hall. We both went right to get to the large main room. The prints were positively not ours. As we got closer, it got worse. The footprints started 8 to 10 feet from the door, in the middle of the hall. It looked like a person had teleported 10 feet from the door, mid-stride, and walked the opposite way and around the corner. We booked out of there as fast as possible. Thank fuck there was an exit in the boiler room, because I can't imagine climbing up those pipes in a panic. Literally never went back to that building. On the way back to his house, I asked my buddy what he saw, and he said he saw the prints, noticed how far away from the door they were. So, I know that I wasn't just seeing things. I'm an atheist. I don't have a good explanation for this, and I'd really love one. To clarify, we didn't see them appear. We saw them after they had been made, and they looked as new as ours. Bonus fact, the tower, it had a window at the top. Some people claim that they could see someone standing in there at night sometimes. There were a couple of times when I swear something looked like it could be in the window before this whole incident happened. But I guess it could easily just be my mind playing tricks. There's a bit of backstory, but it's important. In February of 2015, my sister ended up buying a Ouija board. She bought it from Spencer's Gifts, so it was cheap and plastic. It has a moon and a sun in the top 2 corners, 2 images on the bottom that I don't really remember. She made plans with 2 of our friends and myself to use the board. My mother is a Bible thumper, so we couldn't do it at our house. We decided to go to one of her friends' houses, since her parents are open to things like that. We all spent the night at S's house. They wanted to wait and take the board out at 12 a.m., the witching hour, to have a higher chance of making contact with something. We had a dance party, ate a ton of junk food, and about 10:30, we settled to watch a movie. I fell asleep. At about 11:45, S stopped the movie, and we started setting up. I was tired from our craziness. We shut off the lights, lit white candles, got around the board. My sister, S, and I had our hands on the planchette, while the other friend, D, sat next to us with paper and pencil to document. She was too scared to use the board. We opened the board and asked questions without much luck. We stopped and talked about what we could do to help things move along. After a while, my sister looked up an app on her phone. It claimed to translate the words that ghosts were saying, or something like that. S thought it was stupid, but we were going to try anything. The phone was handed off to D to keep an eye on it. We kept talking about the candles being too bright, or someone not being open enough to it, when D said that the phone just said plastic and board, one after the other. We took that as a sign that something may be happening. The moment I put my fingers on the planchette, I started shaking. Dread washed over me so intensely, but I couldn't let go of the planchette. I didn't want to. It took all I had to keep myself from crying. The board started off silent, but all of a sudden it moved to Z, then Y, then X. My sister instantly got scared and said, "Move it to goodbye now." We did. The feeling was gone as quickly as it came. My sister explained that if whatever is moving the planchette starts counting down, moving up or down in the alphabet, making figure eights, or moving to the four corners, it's a bad spirit or demon. It's trying to make the board a portal. We stopped for the night after that. I didn't tell them how I felt. I was worried that they would think I was just messing with them, that they wouldn't believe me. I had trouble sleeping because I thought that it would come back as I slept. I never experienced dread quite like that before. It felt violating. It felt like whatever it was tried to possess my body. I feel that because I was so tired. I was vulnerable to attack. I'll never play with a board again. It's not a game. It's so real and can go very wrong. When I was a teenager, I got into using a Ouija board. At first, I did it with my friends. We thought it was fun. But eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I started using it alone, in my already paranormally active 115-year-old house. First things first, I do not advise using Ouija boards, ever. I regret my choices as they were dangerous, filled my already creepy house with more bad energy. At best, they're either powerless and or have a good sense of humor. I won't be mentioning any of them by name, except Dave, who was harmless, as I don't want to invite that energy back into my life. If you decide to do it against all warnings, do it away from where you live. I became particularly close with a little boy who had drowned, along with his sister in some Eastern European country. His sister taunted and made him feel lonely and angry in the afterlife, a very dangerous thing for a spirit, as this can turn them into very dark souls. They feed on your energy in order to communicate through the board, so it's best not to contact darker entities who will affect your energy with theirs. This is why I tried to be there for him. I was kind to him, and he changed, promising to keep me company, as I had done for him. I allowed him to connect to me, though I still don't really understand the full extent of what that means. To this day, I hope he's okay. However, this story is about an entity that first called himself Secret. I won't repeat his real name. He was incredibly dark. As time went by, I found out that he was a Nazi, involved in and proud of many deaths in France. Despite me losing family in World War II, I had to keep sweet with him. It's helpful to joke around, as they're less likely to act on any vitriol. I didn't want to. He was creepy, and yes, a fucking Nazi. Not my kind of guy. One day, my stepdad tried to turn the bathroom light on. It wouldn't work, so he called my mom over. As soon as she touched it, the light switched on. They went back and forth testing this, making sure it wasn't just a coincidence. Many strange things happened in that house that defy logic, so even though it was creepy, they moved on and added it to the pile of weird stories. As I write this out and connect the dots, I realize that the reason might be because my stepdad is Jewish. Horrible. I was suspicious, but again, it wasn't completely out of the ordinary for the house. Then the light started flickering. It was an old house, so it was just bothersome at first. I don't know who spoke to it, but quickly we realized it was responding to us. We tested by asking simple math questions, 1 + 3, stuff like that, and it would never flicker outside of an answer. 1 flicker for no, 2 for yes. My mom and sister came to the conclusion that it was our late Nana, as the light said it was. I didn't believe it for a second. I knew I'd brought something more powerful than the other whatevers were in the house before I started using the Ouija board. I maintained a level of skepticism despite the conversations my family would have with the light. It was when I asked it to sing with me that I had no doubt that it was not a series of weird coincidences. I picked London Bridge as it's pretty old and famous. It flickered on every syllable, in time with my singing, and stopped as soon as I did. That was really creepy. I threw a few names around, first asking if it was the boy. The answer was no. It was no to every name until I got to the Nazi. I was showering and I felt pretty vulnerable, but continued joking as I did when using the board. After that, I didn't speak to the light. Tried to tell my sister and mom to stop when we were out of the house. I never told them why, other than I thought it was not a friendly thing. Thankfully, my mom is pretty superstitious, and my sister is easily wound up, so they stopped feeding him attention. This didn't ward me off talking to my little boy spirit, though. It was habit at this point in my life to check on him. He said something about my soul becoming dark. However, I didn't think too much of it, as he would say all sorts of stuff a lot before I befriended him, as did most of the spirits. A little while after this, my friends and I decided to do a session outside of a derelict pub by the beach to see if we could get anything about the building's past. There was no way we would go inside. It was dangerous, probably full of homeless people that were squatting, pitch black inside. Instead, we sat out front, not far from a road where passerbys could see us, but we picked a day with bad weather to limit attention. We contacted a spirit called Dave. He was pretty friendly and funny. Apparently, he died from falling in a balcony in a drunken stupor, but wasn't bitter about it. We were all laughing as 2 ladies walked by. They asked what we were doing, but I'm pretty sure they already knew. We explained, and one of them warned us that it may seem fun, but it's the devil, which, admittedly, we did know. The other lady, however, revealed that she was a witch. At first, she told us stories about her and her witch friends, but then gave us a piece of advice. Your energy is sacred. These activities corrupt you, lead you to dark thoughts and traumatic events. Sadly, I think my friend may have been a victim of this, as shortly after, she entered a depression and we don't talk anymore. There were many factors to this, and I don't want to blame it entirely on the Ouija board, but it's a possibility, I guess. The lady told us of her white witch friend, one who practices light magic. She would ask to send us peace and protection, and asked us to look out for white feathers over the next few days. Me and my other friend saw white feathers. Mine was stuck to the front door of my house the next day. I don't know if I do believe in all of that, but the friend who didn't see one is the girl who entered a depression. If it's true, I certainly do feel guilty, as I was the one doing it so much. It's a source of great shame for me. We didn't have any Ouija sessions from that point on. It's wise to listen to a witch. The light stopped flickering, whether it's because we stopped entertaining him, or the White Witch did send us protection. I don't know. It's most likely the former, as they feed off of energy. I stopped talking to my little boy, though I did call out for him, wish him well in the house from time to time, just in case he was listening. I've never really felt any bad energy around me since. I try to be a positive influence on the people around me. I try to be forgiving and kind. I'm grateful for what I have, and I do my best not to ruin good things. And I notice white feathers a lot more now. Again, please don't do Ouija boards. They're so bad for you. And I'm lucky that I dealt with it well and moved out of that creepy old house into a new building with no history. They may seem cool and entertaining. You may even want to make a joke out of it if you don't believe it's real. But they are vessels for evil. I don't know if my soul is still all mine, if what the spirits said or threatened is true. Just don't do it. So for quite some time, I've been planning on spending New Year's Eve in downtown Seattle with my family. Or at least I was. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do now exactly. I'm new-ish to the area, having just moved to Seattle from Olympia before Thanksgiving. The Space Needle is just a short drive from my new apartment. I thought it would be really fun to host family and watch the light show this year. I joined a group on Facebook to meet new people. This was back in November. The group was tight-knit and was meant for people that had similar interests. I actually met 3 really great people on there. One who's been planning to join my family this year at the Needle. However, of course there's a however, I also met some creeps, I guess. At least, I can only imagine that they found me through there. I started receiving direct messages from a guy that I didn't know, and to be frank, his profile looked pretty scammy. I wasn't exactly fooled, but I wasn't immediately scared, just annoyed at another scammer. But then, I read the messages that followed, and I was a little bit more concerned. Hey, Katie, can I talk to you? Katie, you're not ignoring me, are you? Okay, look, Katie, I have to tell you something. It's really important. Please, don't ignore me, or I'll have to show you. Of course, I did ignore them, because I didn't know them. Nothing that any stranger could tell me is going to be that important to my life, right? Well, a couple of days later, I get this message. Katie, I told you it was important, and you still didn't listen to me. Sorry, but I had to prove to you that I could help you. I'm sorry about that. So confused by this, I immediately copy and paste everything into a message. I forward it to my best friend in Olympia. She tells me she's going to do some digging on this guy and see what's up. Almost immediately, she tells me not to worry. This is a fake profile. Some quick Google image search thing that my friend does. It proves that his profile picture is taken from the internet. It's not even somebody else's profile. She says that I don't need to worry, that they're literally probably just trying to get me to respond. She says I should change my password, block the person, etc. So I do. And then I move on almost entirely because it feels like nothing. Until the following night. I'm getting ready for work, and I'm incredibly disturbed when I see a heart is drawn on my mirror in the fog. I can't even bring myself to leave the bathroom, fully aware I'm going to be late for work. My cell phone for sure is sitting on my bedside table or by the coffee maker. I truly didn't know in that moment, so I just waited and listened. I After several minutes, I decide to make a run for my phone. I choose the bedroom as my destination. Luckily, it's where my phone is. The first thing I do is I call my dad. The second thing I do is I call the police per his instructions. I don't leave my room for over an hour. That's about how long it took for the police to show up. They didn't immediately find the previous messages I told them about troubling. They actually didn't even ask to see the messages. The one cop told me they likely weren't connected. Honestly, they didn't seem to believe me. Maybe one of the officers because she was a female, but the other was rather dismissive. I asked if they could check the whole place, and they did. As they did, I checked my computer, my Facebook. Sure enough, I had a new message from a new person that I'd never met. Another spammy-looking profile, only this time it was just 2 messages. Katie, followed by a single red heart. I showed the officers, and that's when they asked me to come down to the station, saying I could file a formal complaint. They recommended I bring my laptop. They could make copies of the messages, but also they could work to track where the messages were coming from. This all took place just before and right after Christmas. It's been one of the worst holidays to date. I was really looking forward to spending time with my family in the city. Now I'm just crippled with anxiety. Checking my phone every 5 seconds to see if the police have any information. Checking to see if I've gotten any more messages. I don't even want to go to work. Not alone anyway. Truly, it's awful. I hate this for anyone who's had to go through it. I know it seems extreme, but I've literally been worried someone's going to kill me. Currently, my older brother is staying with me, but even he can't stay forever. He'll be here until the landlord at least agrees to change my logs. There's no surveillance around here, so unfortunately they can't help with IDing anyone. So I just wait. As for New Year's Eve, I don't know. I may just go back to Olympia where I don't have a stalker. This was something I experienced while working retail my senior year. It's been over 10 years, but it's a pretty memorable story. I was working the register, and it was during that in-between time, after Christmas and before New Year's. Stores are still really busy, but a different kind of busy, where people are less stressed and more in need of your assistance. I'm helping a family with a return. There's a man, an older woman who I assume is grandma, and a child, about 5 or 6. The man and the woman, they seem very somber. The child, well, he looks sort of out of place. He seemed like maybe he was sick, just by the way he looked, a sort of gray color. But though his expression was a meek one, it was a nice expression. He seemed to be happy. The man asked if they could make a quick return. I looked at them and then the child. I said to the man, "Sure, no problem. What are we returning today?" The man then proceeds to hand me the merchandise. It's one of those Angry Birds board games, I guess. It's basically the same idea as the game on your phone, but kids can knock around these plastic birds and wood structures. I don't know, very popular that year though. I hadn't seen a lot of them returned since it seemed to be on every kid's list. I asked the normal questions that one asks during a return. Was there anything wrong with the item? Do you want to exchange for a new one? It's at this time I see the woman walk away, the child following closely behind her. They don't leave the store, just wander near the register, and then sit near the children's toys. The man answers me saying no to both questions. I ask if they'd like to make an exchange for another toy or just go ahead with the return. The man just stares down. After a moment, I think maybe he's about to start crying. I look out into the crowd, briefly scanning for the woman and the child. At first, I don't see them, but then suddenly the woman is back. However, this time she's alone. She takes the man by the shoulder and tells him it's okay, that he can go sit down now. Grandma proceeds to tell me that they'll just be making a full return today. They unfortunately don't have a reason to exchange. I don't know if it's because I was in full work mode or what, but none of this had really clicked with me yet. Instead, I was just sort of feeling bad for the kid. He's gotten this gift, and now he'll walk away with nothing. I just couldn't let that happen. I process the return, and before the woman leaves, I say, "Oh, wait." I hand over a lollipop and say, "Here, for the little boy." The woman freezes, and she just looks at me, almost horrified. Instantly, I feel I've done something wrong, and I lower the lollipop. She continues to stare over the counter at me before she shakes herself out of it and shakily says, "The boy." I search around the store and I can't find the boy to point out. I start to think about the boy, how he looked. It wouldn't be another minute until I really understood what was happening. Confused about why she's so confused, I tell her I'm so sorry. I could have sworn I'd seen her come into the store with a little boy. Her eyes well up in tears, and without hesitating, she tells me that she lost her grandson the week before Christmas. She says they're here, returning his gifts. Suddenly, I'm crying too. So embarrassing, but it's like I couldn't help it. I just felt immediately what this family was feeling, and I felt awful I'd dragged out their experience. But then, the woman grabs my hand with the lollipop still inside, and she says, "Grape was his favorite, you know." She smiles through her own tears, and before she walked away, I found myself blurting out, "He's always with you." And then I grabbed my coworker at the register, asking if she could cover for me. I remember I went to the back of the store, and I just sort of lost it a little more. Later that night, before the mall was closing, I went to ask security if they wouldn't mind reviewing some footage. Since you can't typically just ask that without reason, I said I needed to see if someone had taken something from the display around 3:18 p.m. Of course, I remembered the time after all that. I can see me, I can see the man, the old woman, but there is no little boy. Not in the beginning when I saw him, and nowhere else to be found. I told security thanks, and then I left. It was such a chilling experience. Not scary, I guess, just sort of mind-bending. I never saw a photo of the woman's grandson, but I'm just sure that's who I saw. When I was 18 in the mid-2000s, a guy sat next to me on the train as I was heading back to university. And for the whole journey, he kept talking about things that didn't quite make sense. I felt like I knew him, and he was talking as if I was a long-lost friend. He didn't seem to have any mental health issues. He was intelligent. He seemed to speak about things that connected with me on a deep level. He kept drinking small bottles of whiskey, the kind that you can get on the train. And he seemed to be enjoying everything that was happening, like it was all new to him. His confidence was off the charts, not in a player type of way, but as if he was from a slightly more free and socially advanced culture. There was a definite vibe of, he's not from here. The tone of the conversation for the hour-long trip, it was him both teaching me about life and building my confidence up, which I felt was strange given that I had no idea who he was. The whole time I felt a strange sensation that there was some sort of different vibration about him, like he didn't quite fit into his surroundings and all the other people, almost on a molecular level, like there was a bubble around him. It was very odd. For reference, He appeared to be in his late 20s, wore black, had black facial hair and black, not long but not short hair, and he had a very healthy vibe about him. Eventually, we arrived at the station, and as I was getting off the train, he put his hand on my shoulder, looked into my eyes with reverie, like I was some kind of holy figure, and he said, "You're a great person." And I felt genuine emotion from him that was far too strong for the circumstances. Then he walked away, the wrong way, and disappeared into the crowd. I looked for him through the people, but I couldn't see him at all. He just disappeared. For years, I've wondered if he was some sort of time traveler that came back to give me a message. Who knows? Maybe he was. Has anyone else experienced anything similar? Or can you shed any light on what this could have been? I've heard stories of doppelgangers, glitch in the matrix stories. I've always been fascinated by them. I used to wonder, why don't more people have these experiences? And then one day, I had one of my own. A doppelganger event or shift in time, reality, whatever it was, it happened to me. A little bit of context first about myself and where I live. I'm a 20-year-old guy, tall, broad shoulders, brown hair. I live in a small English village in the countryside. It's the kind of place where you don't see many new people living there. I've lived there my entire life, and I see the same regular people going about their lives on a regular basis. Anyways, back to the story. I walked from my house just on the edge of the village to the local shop to get some groceries. It was midday, and the weather was quite dull and gloomy. Everything was going normal until I walked back from the shop. I'm walking on the path outside of an old church. I carry on walking down the path ahead of me, but I have the option to cross the street and walk on the other path that leads to the same route that I was going to, just a different way. Anyway, as I think about crossing over, I look into the distance not too far away from me, and on the other side of the path, I see me. This person is the same height and build as me, and they're wearing the same clothes. I was wearing a green wax coat and black trousers, and so was the guy ahead of me on the other side of the road. He also had the same brown hairstyle as me. My mind was racing about what could be happening. I then noticed that the guy ahead is carrying the same shopping bag as I am. I am then surprised to see this person that looks just like me and wave at an old woman who was walking the same path as I was, but was ahead of me in the opposite direction. I walked past the old woman, and then I decided to cross the road to follow the other me. But as I'm about to, a black car drives by, blocking my view. I decided not to go the same way as the other me because I had a weird feeling that I shouldn't. As I make the decision not to go the way that the guy that looks like me went, he disappears, just vanished, the moment that I decided not to go that way. I didn't see him disappear. It was like he was never there. But I still had the vivid memory of the event. It was like by suddenly deciding not to go that way, I changed time. I moved quickly ahead to see where he was, but this other me is nowhere to be found. I look in the driveways of people's houses, and he wasn't in any of them. There's nowhere for him to go. My mind was blown. As I walked back, I had the most eerie feeling and got quite creeped out. I think I had a time slip, that I was seeing into a possible future, but by changing my mind and not going that way, that never happened, so the other me disappeared. But one thing that I could not figure out was who was the old woman that he was waving at. I don't know her, and I walked past her, but when I walked past her, she didn't seem surprised or shocked that she saw two of me. Who she was is also a mystery. My dad was a truck driver when he left the military in the late 2000s. By the time my siblings and I were born, he only drove in our home state of Texas, and summers were extremely busy for him. This incident happened in 2006, one of his extended trips across Texas. I believe he was driving south on 281. He was getting pretty tired when he pulled into a truck stop. He was making his way to the on-site convenience store when he noticed a young woman pacing in front of the shop. She looked to be in her early 20s, slim, very pretty, and wore a tank top with cut-off shorts, normal attire for Texas summers. She was carrying a plate covered with aluminum foil, as if she were making her way home from a family barbecue. Dad finishes his business in the store and headed back to his truck, where he was stunned to see the blonde woman sitting in his passenger seat. He was utterly shocked. He had no clue who this woman was or how she got inside. Dad was always vigilant on the road. He never left his truck unlocked. He demanded that she get out. He wasn't afraid yet, but something felt off about the mysterious woman. She sat there, staring at him with the covered plate on her lap, not saying a word. For a moment, he debated simply getting out, walking over to the passenger side, yanking her out of the cab. But he decided against it. I'm still not sure why. The whole thing was beyond strange. So Dad, against his better judgment, cranks his rig and drives off, the blonde still in the passenger seat. A few miles later, he attempts to make conversation. I guess he was trying to quell his extreme discomfort. He asked her name, but the woman remained silent. As he continued down the highway, lustful thoughts began to creep into his mind. I'm sure it had been a while since he'd last seen my mother, and they were way out here in the rural Texas roads. Who would find out? Just this one time. What could happen, right? Dad put his hand on her thigh, right above her knee, and the moment he touched her, the woman turned from a gorgeous young woman into a hellish monster. Her face became rugged, her eyes black, her teeth, they grew sharpened into fangs, and her tongue was unnaturally long. The demonic figure let out a guttural hiss, and the plate that she was holding suddenly began to move, as if it were a pile of withering worms beneath the foil. A putrid smell penetrated the truck's cab. Dad quickly turned his face away and managed to stop on the side of the road. As the truck came to a halt, Dad threw open his door and he jumped out. After his breathing returned to normal, he composed himself and looked back at the truck. The demonic woman had vanished. He was alone. He prayed for God to rebuke the evil spirit before eventually getting back into his truck and driving off. The woman never returned, but it took a while for the lingering stench to dissipate. When Dad got home, he recounted everything to Mom. He was so upset that she forgave him for being unfaithful. He'd seen a lot in his life, but nothing had ever frightened him like that. He blamed himself for impure thoughts, and it's possible that's why he attracted the evil spirit. Some might argue that people cheat all the time, but nothing like this happens. I can't explain why. I only know what happened to my dad on the very dark, lonely roads of Texas. When I was older, I asked about his experience, but he would never respond with words. He only just nodded. 1994, I was 24, and at the ER with a piece of glass lodged in my pinky finger. It had a pretty nasty infection. The doctor removed the glass, irrigated the wound, and sent me home with instructions to return if anything worsened. Home was a 30-minute drive, and within moments of arriving, I began to feel immense pain. I immediately went back to the hospital, but by then, the pain was completely unbearable. The veins in my right arm were purple. It felt like someone had used a spade bit to drill a hole in my hand before dousing it in gasoline and striking a match. I collapsed on the ER floor, and the next thing I knew, they were cutting the ring off of my swollen finger and preparing me for surgery. The doctor asked if I was willing to lose my hand to save my life, and I told him to do whatever was necessary. I later woke up in the ICU with a severe strep infection. I still had my hand, but they cut open my pinky, palm, and wrist to scrape the infection from my nerves and tendons. I stayed in the ICU for 2 weeks, but my blood counts weren't improving. One night, I had a dream, or a vision, if you will. I woke to a black shadow lifting and dropping the end of my bed, but it disappeared after startling me awake. Terrified, I rang the nurse's bell several times, but when there was no response, I got up to find the nurse's station. The hospital was different. The lights were off in my room, and the door was open. I walked down the dimly lit hallway, and it was nasty. Filth was dripping and oozing down the urine-colored walls. There were a few people roaming around, but they were dead. Slowly shuffling about in their hospital gowns with their IV stands, I ran back to my room and jumped into bed. The black shadow returned, and I realized he was neither death or a demon. He didn't have detailed facial or body features, just a black humanoid body surrounded by an aura of darkness. Without making a sound, he violently repeated, lifting the end of the heavy hospital bed and slamming it down, shaking it side to side. Finally, with as much authority as possible, I yelled, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to go." The room momentarily went black, and there was a sudden bam. A bright white electricity shattered the void to envelop the demon with a crackling vehemence. The creature reacted as if it were being fried by 20,000 volts of pure electricity, and just like that, it was gone. I woke to the welcoming sight of bright lights, a sanitized room, and beeping monitors. When I rang the nurse's bell, they came immediately and checked everything out. The next morning, the doctor said my blood work was great, with a normal white cell count, which, don't forget, there had been 14 days of no improvement before that. I was released the following day, and I went through vigorous physical therapy to regain full use of my hand. It took 28 years to write this experience, so I'm sharing it here with you. I have a close friend who's more like a brother than my actual brothers. We're a lot alike and vastly different, yet we fit together very well. I'm religious, yet he's agnostic. I'm open to the existence of spirits, but he doesn't believe in that stuff. He's always been skeptical of ghosts, haunted places, karma, mediums, tarot cards, astrology. Well, you get the picture. I, on the other hand, think hauntings could be evil spirits, but I won't go into that too much. My friend and we had a long conversation about different things when it comes to this stuff. He doesn't believe in anything that he can't see with his own eyes, and he teases me about different things, like the time I went on a ghost tour, or when I visited the Winchester House in Gettysburg. One day, he came over to meet with me, and he looked very serious, almost distressed. I thought that there had been an accident or that someone had died, but instead, he proceeded to explain what happened while home alone with his young daughter. His wife had taken their older child shopping. It was getting late, nearly 8 o'clock, so he got his daughter ready for bed. No one else was home. Their house was an older rental property, maybe from the 30s. It was small, but it sat on a big lot. And it was very dark, had a huge tree blocking most of the sunlight. While his daughter was taking a bath, he was laying out her pajamas and getting a towel ready when he saw a woman walking down the hallway. He described her as having long black hair, like his wife, wearing a red top. Assuming it was his wife, he called out to her, but she didn't answer. Confused, he poked his head into the hallway, expecting to see their bedroom light turned on, but it was as dark as the hallway. He called out again, but there was still no response. He went into the bedroom, turned on the light, and he felt a shiver run down his spine, like an irrational fear. Then he hurried back to his daughter and told her to finish up. He kept looking for the woman. The front and the back doors were locked. Outside, his car was the only one in the driveway. His wife definitely hadn't returned. He grabbed a hammer, started searching room to room, but he found nothing. He called his wife, and she was still at Target. So he took his daughter to her room and went around turning off every light. When his wife came home, he pulled her aside and told her about the lady. Like myself, she also believes in ghosts and said, "Yeah, I didn't want to tell you, but I know this house is haunted." My friend was so unraveled that he fixed himself a straight bourbon, drank it in one gulp, and then stayed up the entire night, expecting to see that woman again. It was 1998, and my mom had just bought her first home, which, as a single mom, was a huge deal. It was a 4-bedroom, 1-bath, with a family room and pool. The house was big, had lots of room for my brother and I to play. We were 6 and 8. Ever since Mom was a child, she's been able to see demons. And because of her gift, the church used her to locate spirits. When I was 4, she said that I would see them too, but I don't remember. She just said that I would react to them. I do feel and hear them, though. When we moved into that house, I felt a tall, dark figure in front of my bedroom door. He never dared come in, but he walked around the kitchen, which was right outside of my room. I never closed my bedroom door because I always felt him there. Because of it, I had to sleep with a nightlight in order to feel safe. If the light went off, I'd become paralyzed. I'd sweat profusely until Mom brought a candle. Multiple times, I found the courage to demand he leave, and he did, on some occasions. I was able to sleep. A lot of weird things happened in that house, and Mom spoke to her pastor about it. When he came, he said that there was nothing that he could do because the spirits, they were using our home as a bridge between the spirit world and our neighbors, who were summoning them. So, we just had to learn to live with that. For some months, I felt calm, and for others, I stayed in my room with a feeling of pure dread. That dark figure was there every night, and he only left when I told him to. At 21, I got a new dog. She slept with me and made me feel even safer. When I felt the figure, she'd bark at the door. The first time that she did, I knew I wasn't crazy. that it was never in my head. My dog gave me extra courage to send him away, and he did leave. I slept better than I did as a child. My dog also barked at the same area during the day. At 22, I moved out and I had my first child. Though my mom was awesome enough to let us stay with her for 3 months while we adjusted to our new life as parents and learned from her. The first night, I slept in Mom's room with my son. My partner slept in my room, where there's just a sofa. The next morning, his eyes were filled with pure panic. A noise had awoken him in the night. In the room, the door was open. A tall, dark figure came closer and closer, but my partner wasn't able to move or speak. I always told him about the figure, but he always brushed it off as me being paranoid. Well, that day, he learned I wasn't lying. Years later, Mom sold the house to a lovely couple with a toddler and a baby on the way. But we heard that they sold it again. Now, it's being rented out, but no one wants it. I always ask my mom if it's because of the spirits. A lot more has happened in that house, but this was what happened to me. When I was 12, I visited our family ranch in the Mexico countryside for the first time in years. The property's been in our family for centuries. The pictures and paintings of my ancestors hanging throughout the ranch always made me want to get home before dark. All of my cousins were in a separate room, eating and talking. When I went to the bathroom, I noticed a door right next to the bathroom. I assumed it was a bedroom, but I didn't check out of respect for my uncle, the owner. While doing my business, I heard what sounded like an old wooden rocking chair, rocking in the next room. I didn't think much of it. I went on to washing my hands, and that's when I heard nails clawing at the bathroom door. I didn't panic right away. I know how my cousins can be, and I thought someone who needed to use the bathroom was just playing a lighthearted prank. But when I opened the door, no one was there. I rushed back to my cousins, and I brushed off the situation without mentioning it. Later that day, my cousins told me some scary stories about the ranch, and they revealed it was haunted. They said an old lady used to live in the room next to the bathroom, and sometimes, when you're near her space, she'll rock in her chair. Back around 1992, I was a sophomore in high school, and unlike most of my friends, I didn't work a typical fast food or retail job. I was great with my hands, and I did things like construction, demolition, flooring, auto mechanics. I started working at 14, so I was always paid under the table. It was beneficial for both sides since I was only called when needed, and I was willing to work evenings and weekends. One of my employers did remodeling jobs like restaurants, bars, retail shops, commercial projects. Those were the kind that were perfect for me because they could only be worked on after hours and weekends. It wasn't uncommon for one employer to leave me alone with a list of things to do, mostly demolition. I did this while the other crew worked on installation and remodeling. I was a kid, but they respected me because I did what I was supposed to do. And I did it without complaints. I was paid well. I made more in one night than my friends at McDonald's made all week. One day, I got a call about a project for the following Saturday. I was told to bring food, drinks, because there was nothing nearby. I filled a small cooler with Cokes, Gatorade, chips, and a couple sandwiches. Back then, I could eat a whole pizza and burn it off. I didn't have a license yet, so starting that Saturday, my employers picked me up, drove me to the site, and left me there, alone. I rarely worked with other crew members. They were all the skilled labor guys. I was just the demo kid. This part was my major downfall. I didn't pay attention to where we were going. I was too busy talking about cars, and at the time, my goal was to save up enough money to buy an old muscle car and rebuild it. It took a long time to arrive at the site. It was in the middle of nowhere. You may not think California has places like this, but back in the early 90s, there were big plots of land and homes out in the Mojave Desert. We left the highway and went down a few other 2-lane roads for a long distance. He asked about my drinks and pulled out a jug of water that he had in his truck. It looked like it had been there a while, but he told me to take it since the water to the house I was working on was shut off. As we pulled up to the property, he was in a hurry to get to another site. So I hurried to help him unload the breaker bars, shovels, pry bar, hammer, broom, trash bins, and a small tool bag. He said that he would pick me up at 5 or 6, since there was no electricity at the site either. That was his way of saying that I was only getting paid until then. It was never too outrageous, and we always had a good understanding of those kinds of things. He drove away, and I was left all alone. I walked into the mostly empty house, and I began removing what was left of the furniture and appliances, ripping out the floors, gutting the kitchen and bathrooms. Removing the paneling was next. This project was what we now call a flip. They were going to fix it up and sell it. Almost immediately, I got a little bit spooked by the place. It was very odd. Now, remember, I was used to working alone all night, and this was the middle of a sunny Saturday. The house was old, dark, musty, and sort of cool, the kind of cool that gives you goosebumps. To add to the spook factor, let me describe what I remember about the house. Imagine being back in the 60s. There was dark green carpet that looked like matted down broccoli, pine wood with dark stains, old granny curtains, an avocado green sink, and the paneling was actual tongue and groove boards. The old furniture and stuffed animals looked at least 30 years old. The overall style was right out of an old Western ranch. There were actual wagon wheels inside and outside the home. I had an old battery-powered radio that only picked up a few stations, but I was just happy for the noise. I started removing all the junk, and as I normally did, when there wasn't a dumpster on site, I made a trash pile. I tore the flooring out next, and to my delight, everything came up with ease. All I had to do was rip, cut, toss. Then, I used a big demo hammer to tear apart the kitchen in less than an hour. I ended up using the big jug of water to periodically wash my hands and face, but by late noon, the desert dryness starts taking the moisture from you. By then, I was down to my last drink and had already eaten everything I brought. No worries, the guys should be here in a couple of hours, right? As the time for them to arrive neared, I finished the last of my tasks. I even swept the entire place so that it could be ready for the rehab crew to start making it look modern. It wasn't a typical hot desert day for that time of year, but as soon as the sun set, it began to cool rapidly. I had on a flannel shirt, but that wasn't enough, and it was starting to get dark. This was before cell phones became common, and the house had no electricity, no water, or phone. I climbed on top of the roof, hoping to see something in the distance, and miles down, I saw the road connected to a smaller road. There were a few homes, but they were all dark. My first thought was to hike to the neighbor's house and ask to use the phone, but no one was home, and this home also looked abandoned. The early 90s was the start of a recession, so it wasn't uncommon for a lot of foreclosed homes to be in track of occupied homes. I worked in a lot of those at the time. I started thinking about my options as it grew darker. I could stay at the house until morning, hike a few miles with what water I had left, or wait until morning and start hiking then. I also realized that No one knew where I was, except my boss. I don't know if he told anyone else where I was, and my family wouldn't miss me until at least Sunday night. I didn't even tell them that I was going to work there. They knew how much I would work to save up for my car, so they never worried about me not coming home. I didn't have a flashlight or any way to make a fire, but the night sky looked amazing and the moon was bright. Of course, that doesn't mean I didn't try. I was going to make a small fire out of construction debris when the temperature hit the low 40s, but that didn't pan out. My only option was to wait inside the empty, creepy house. It seemed even creepier when sitting alone in the dark. At roughly 8 p.m., my radio's batteries start to die. It was my only source of little light and noise. I grabbed a wooden chair and I sat in the living room facing the door. I heard wind, odd animal noises, and what sounded like leaves crunching under feet. I started shivering from the cold, so I tried to make a fire in the fireplace. Picture Tom Hanks trying to start a fire in Castaway. At least it was keeping my mind on my situation. Sitting there next to the fireplace made the house seem even darker than it should have. It was already dark in the daytime, but now, even with the moonlight, I was essentially sitting in complete darkness. My mind started to play tricks on me. I saw shadows moving inside and outside. I also heard someone talking or whispering, so I got up from my chair and I yelled, "Hello? Hello?" The instant I did, something fell on the other side of the house. I ran back outside. At least I could see better in the moonlight. I heard noises and I saw movement in the distance, but I couldn't make anything out of it. I had my tools sitting next to the corner of the house, ready for my boss to return. So I ran to them, grabbed the Big Daddy. It was the heavy pry bar that I'd used for the demolition, and I was ready to defend myself from who or whatever was out there. I have to keep moving because my shirt wasn't enough to keep me warm. The wind was also picking up. There wasn't a single light around me. I didn't want to risk falling in the dark if I tried to climb back onto the roof. So I got on top of the gate, hoping to see some house or car lights. I immediately thought of the horror stories that people tell about Satanist groups. Strange disappearances, people coming to the Mojave Desert just to bury bodies. Every noise had me on edge. Every shadow had my heart pounding. I knew no one was in that house, but I swore I heard noises from inside. I huddled up on the front porch, looking into the living room window, expecting to see someone any moment. So much had already happened by 11 that I knew it was going to be a long night. I didn't know how I was going to make it another 6 hours until daybreak. The moment light started to appear on the horizon, I planned to take what little water remained and walk east. I knew going east would eventually lead me to a paved road. Closer to midnight, I was wide awake with my eyes fixed on the dirt road, thinking a car would come any minute. I kept turning to look inside each time I heard a new noise. I tried to tell myself that it was just a rat or some other kind of rodent. I saw a shadow move from the kitchen to the hall, and I jumped out of my seat, knowing it was human, not an animal. I started backing my way off the porch towards the debris pile, but I tripped and I fell on the ground. I scrambled back to my feet, but fell again. It was like something pushed me down, and suddenly there were bright lights coming closer as I laid there. I jumped up and saw my boss. He was giving me a "what the heck are you doing" look, but I was just glad to see him. I couldn't even be mad. I asked him what happened, and he apologized, but he thought the other crew was coming to get me. It wasn't until he asked the other crew leader how far along I'd gotten that they realized their mistake. It took him almost 2 hours to get there from where they were, and he felt terrible enough to pay me for the entire time I was there. He also gave me a Coke from his cooler, and I drank it in one gulp. Once we got back to civilization, We went to a drive-thru, and I ate like I'd never eaten before. On the drive home, I asked about the house and told him how creepy it was. He said he didn't have any information on the home, only what we were supposed to do. After that, I made sure to always have extra batteries, flashlights, and double the amount of liquid. A few years back, I ended up working in a small, privately owned restaurant. It stood out to locals and tourists alike due to their multicultural variety. They served American, Indian, Thai, French, and Middle Eastern foods. The small restaurant was formerly a popular Chinese restaurant and local favorite, but the older man who owned it passed away while still inside. So suffice it to say, the townies didn't take too kindly to the foreign city woman that swooped in to purchase the restaurant right after his death. Not only was my former boss flaky and irresponsible, but she could also come off as quite rude at times. She had a rough go of obtaining the proper permits to renovate the historic building. When you do certain renovations in an old building like that, the local laws require you to update a lot of other things that can be quite costly. That meant it was easier to just use her staff for most of the renovation work. Everything was going fairly smoothly until one overcast, drizzly day. We were all gathered in the dining area for a staff meeting. As we sat quietly listening to the boss lady, something a little strange happened. The front door suddenly opened halfway and then carefully closed again, as though someone had simply stepped inside. Of course, no one was there. The door was almost entirely glass, so we could have seen if someone was out there. We all looked at one another, confused, but we just blamed it on the draft since the back door was open, though there was a set of closed kitchen doors in between. The second odd thing that happened to another employee when she was alone one night. She turned the corner past a shelf with some tools on it when an empty cordless drill case went flying past her head. It barely missed her, smashing into the wall instead. She seemed pretty put off by the incident when she told us about it the next day. Following that, random small things would happen occasionally. Sometimes our boss would ask why we didn't come into her office when she saw one of us walk by, but it was always when none of us had been in the area. Besides that, we'd get the occasional strange sound, like a faint voice or a door. There were instances where I'd be cooking in the kitchen, only to walk away for a second, return to find something missing. I'd end up having to measure out and prepare the same ingredients again. If only I had known it was about to get much more terrifying. The final thing to happen was the worst paranormal experience I ever had, hands down. But in order to properly explain this part, I need to explain some things about restaurant kitchens. In a typical setup, the cook line is a skinny walking or standing space typically between the oven, fryers, and cooktop. The prep surfaces and small fridges are on the opposite side, which leaves about 3 or 4 feet of walking space for the cooks. Besides that, there's a dishwasher followed by the rest of what you'd expect to find in a kitchen. Fridges, freezers, giant hood fans, and a hot water heater. The reason I'm listing these is because they all make a constant loud background noise. One day, there were 3 of us working in the kitchen. Me, my boss, and a dishwasher. My boss and I were on the cook line, and the dishwasher was a few feet away. It had been a normal shift until everything suddenly went dead silent. Almost like someone had thrown an invisible, soundproof blanket over us. I looked at the other 2. They also seemed puzzled. "What the hell?" I questioned out loud. "Why is it so freaking quiet all of a sudden?" the dishwasher asked, suspiciously. "I don't know," my boss answered nervously before turning to face me. "Nora, go make sure the fridges and fans are still running. Maybe the power's out. I ventured 10 feet to the cook line, and weirdly enough, I could hear the fans, the dishwasher, water heater, all of the appliances were running like normal. I returned to my boss and, with a confused look, said, "Everything's working fine." That was just the first creepy part. When I stepped back onto the cook line, all was silent again. "Well, Nora, get back to grilling those peppers," my boss snapped, and I got back onto the cook line beside her. After a couple of minutes, I suddenly started to get tunnel vision. I felt really dizzy and nauseous. My boss said to sit out back for a few minutes to get some fresh air. I promptly did. While sitting outside, I saw my boss go into her office, which was kitty corner to the back door. Since the back door was open with only the screen door closed, I was able to hear her phone call. She sounded urgent and shaky as she asked someone to please bring an abalone shell, sage, and some kind of weird oil. Apparently the reason she needed those items was because she felt that something evil walked through her cook line. The shitty part is that I was standing right behind her, only inches away. I waited for her to finish and return to the cook line before going back in, and by then, everything sounded normal again. When I got off about an hour later, I made the 45-minute drive home in just under 30. That night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep, but the few times I did manage to drift off, I got jolted right back awake because I kept seeing a screaming demon thing right in my face. Here's a story about me questioning my sanity as a new mother. Our first child was born during the fall of 2020. From the beginning, she was constantly moving. Could hold her head up almost right away and was always determined to learn something new. One of the first times she rolled over by herself was on our couch with me sitting in front of her. I applauded and cheered while, right next to me, I heard a man cheering too. It was a loud, deep voice with no real words, just joyful gibberish. We were alone. In the spring of 2012, our little family moved into my grandparents' old home in my hometown. We temporarily left our furniture at the old place while renovating a few rooms, and we slept in the huge old bed my grandpa left behind. One night, my boyfriend wanted to finish his work on the dining room floor, so I went to bed with our daughter. I laid her down in the middle of the huge bed, surrounded her with pillows, and quickly went to the bathroom next door. In the middle of brushing my teeth, I heard the deep voice again, only this time he sounded angry, very loud, almost intimidating. I dropped everything and rushed to the bedroom. My daughter was wide awake and had somehow rolled to the edge of the bed. She had never done that before. The situation taught me to expect the unexpected. I arrived just in time to prevent her from falling. I called my boyfriend to ask if he said anything or called out to me, but he didn't. I don't know how to feel. A few months later, on our daughter's first birthday, we had an accident and truly needed to go to the hospital. I won't go into detail, but I thought her head was injured. Thankfully, there was almost no wound. It's like someone put his hand over her head at the perfect moment. I heard him one more time, shortly after the accident. In a calm, clear voice, he said, "I am here." I believe he wants nothing but the best for our daughter. My boyfriend has a difficult relationship with his father's side of the family. When I was pregnant, I forced him to send his grandparents a letter informing them. 3 months before our daughter was born, his grandfather died of cancer, and no one told us. We found out 2 days after our child was born. I feel like I might know who her guardian angel is. I live near a haunted cemetery where I used to go ghost hunting. Throughout my visits, I noticed it was most active in the spring and during the day. I didn't catch many anomalies, just a few occasional orbs. A friend and I once went on a gloomy, rainy day. It was unusually quiet, and we were instantly surrounded by little black flies, the kind you find around lakes and rivers. We took pictures throughout the cemetery, especially of one grave that featured a man and a woman kissing. We didn't experience anything except for the flies and a lack of bird sounds. When we got back to my friend's house, I began looking through the pictures on my cheap straight talk phone. The camera sucked, but it was better than the naked eye. One picture showed something crazy. I still have it, but it's on Facebook, which dulled the quality. Before, it clearly showed a winged creature peeking around a gravestone and a large shadow entity by another. The original is still on that old phone, but it doesn't turn on anymore. I returned a few more times and tried different ghost apps, but none of them actually worked. I thought I heard responses on one app, but I couldn't be sure. The next day, while taking a shower, I caught movement from the corner of my eye. It looked like a black hand with long, bony fingers. I turned away and turned back a minute later to see a tall black figure with long arms standing in the corner of my vision. But when I turned to look at it directly, nothing was there. My shirt was on the floor and bunched in a way that gave it almost an inhuman face. It looked like it was laughing at me. After that experience, I stopped going to the cemetery for a while, but that fall, I returned with a different friend and his girlfriend. It was a weird trip. I took a picture of them on a hill, and there was something standing behind them. It had a pale face with a menacing smile, black eyes, a missing nose. I believe the cemetery has a portal, and that the surrounding woods are haunted as well. Many entities seem to pass through the area, but I believe one is serving as a guard, and I think it's a soul collector. The last part of this story pertains to this one entity. In 2019, I returned to the cemetery with my friend from the first trip. I wanted to try a new app called The Portal, and trust me, that app wasn't what it is today. Supposedly, it used to reverse speech, but you couldn't hear words, and if you did, it was a spirit. We began exploring and asking questions, but nothing happened until we came to a certain area, and we heard whispering through the app. It almost sounded like it was answering our questions, but I couldn't make out its words. It stayed with us until we heard a deep, electronic scream. Then it stopped. Nothing else afterwards. So we returned to my apartment. While watching TV, I saw a shadow on the wall, like it passed in front of the light. I thought my friend was moving his arm, but I looked down the hallway to see a disfigured humanoid shadow dart out of my room. My friend said he felt a weird energy, and later, when he was sleeping, I felt uneasy while playing a game. It felt like something was watching me. So I turned towards the window. I saw a black mass with white, glowing eyes staring at me. It suddenly dissipated like smoke. I told my friend the next morning, and he said he had weird dreams about a monster. Curious, I wanted to try the Portal app again, but my friend didn't want any part of it. I took it to my room, began asking who was here, who the shadow was. I got nothing at first. When I finally did get a response, I asked for a name. In a clear, deep voice, it said,
Louis.
But immediately after, a robotic, inhumane voice said,
Let me in.
After I said no, it repeated itself twice more before falling silent. I asked, Who's there? For a few minutes, a woman's voice said,
Your house is haunted.
Then the robotic voice returned, once again, demanding,
Let me in. Let me in.
I still said no, but this time, it responded with an angry electronic roar. I concluded it was mimicking human voices in an attempt to trick me. I stopped messing around with it, and a few days later, I started having bad luck. I lost my job and my apartment, which resulted in moving back to my mother's house. In October 2019, I got a new job, and things began to improve again, until the entity made itself known, tried to take my life by causing a wreck. I was driving when I saw something that looked like an extremely tall, skeletal deer walking on two legs. It had crazy horns. Its head was a goat skull. I only saw it for a split second. Then everything went black. I woke up to someone knocking on my window. I had a broken eye socket, 2 meniscus tears in my knee, and a bad cut on my head. They said my SUV rolled a quarter of a mile. I didn't mention the cemetery's name because it's a dangerous place. I've never gone back. I truly believe that the entity that's always there is either a soul collector, some kind of portal guardian. I've encountered lesser demons, but I've never seen anything like this. I have a photo of this entity, but it manipulated the background to form a face. Last night I was finishing up a YouTube video as I got into bed. When it ended, I set my alarm and leaned over to plug in my phone. When I rolled back, I noticed a foggy mass above my body. It was black and partially transparent, but it felt heavy and dense, like a very negative energy mass. I immediately sat up and felt a head rush like I was on drugs. It kept growing stronger, and multiple different frequencies began to loudly ring in my ears. There were at least 3 different pitches, and no, it wasn't just my tinnitus. I'm very aware of what those episodes are like. These frequencies were layered over one another. It felt like something was trying to communicate with me. I turned on the light, went to the bathroom, and tried saying, If anything is trying to contact me, I can't hear what you're saying. I feel sick, and this isn't making any sense, so please stop. But it didn't stop. I checked the locks on the doors before returning to bed, and once the lights were off again, I felt the same negative energy vacate my room. As I laid there, feeling sick, I began to pray, asking God for help. I repeated, Please do not allow negative energy into this house. For 5 minutes, as I envisioned a white light cleansing every room as it grew brighter and brighter. After that, the energy completely shifted. The negativity, along with the ringing, was gone, and I didn't feel nauseous anymore. My efforts were paying off, and after a few more minutes, I started to feel warm, positive energy. One last detail. I have the washer and dryer in my room because that's the only hookup spot. Last night, My roommate was doing laundry, so I planned to ask if he was having negative thoughts or feelings at the time. I can't control his energy, but I can explain it to him for the next time. This probably sounds crazy, but I've been having experiences like this my entire life. I'm currently 28, but as a child, I heard voices, I saw shadows often. As an adult, I've had extremely similar situations to the one I just described. That's how I knew what to do. At a younger age, I would have simply fallen asleep terrified with the negative energy in my room. I lived in Michigan, Tennessee, and Florida over the past 10 years. I've had the craziest experiences in Tennessee. Michigan comes in as a close second. But there were almost none in Florida, which is interesting since I lived alone in that instance. Maybe I'm just sensitive to other people's energy. Has anyone ever had a similar experience? Every time I tell my friends or family, they just can't relate. Thanks for taking the time to read this. I hope others with similar situations will find this thread and see that they aren't alone. Some people are simply more sensitive to these occurrences. My name is Janelle, and I'm a 21-year-old French student from France, and the following events took place April 2021. Tired of waiting for true love, I decided to lose my virginity with my best friend. Afterwards, I found a fantastic boyfriend and we got along wonderfully for 3 months. Then, he threw me away for still being in love with his ex, and yes, I'm still upset about it. Fragile little thing that I am, I made my first suicide attempt, went to the ER, and then landed in a mental hospital. Even with treatment, I was depressed for a few months, and I had a strong penchant for alcohol. What better way to continue my cycle of self-destruction than with dating apps? A few weeks after being released from the hospital, I matched with new people and forgot all about my dear ex. I always met the men at home because that's what I did on my actual first dates, and I didn't know any better. One day, I matched with a guy we'll call Matthew. He wasn't very handsome, and he had a few extra pounds, but I'm not Beyonce either, so I agreed to meet. We laughed a little and shared common interests, especially smoking weed. I was already planning to smoke some joints before sex. He told me his address. I didn't know if it was real. He also mentioned where he used to work, but he'd just gotten fired. I didn't care if he had a job or not. I didn't want a life with him. I explained that I was recently released from a mental clinic, that I was still fragile and depressed. It was all to make him understand that he couldn't play with me, that I was looking for sex, but also conversation and hugs. I wasn't looking for a one-night stand. He assured me that's what he wanted too, that he was actually quite cuddly. I thought he was perfect. After only a couple of days of talking, we agreed on a mojito party at my house, and he brought some joints. Matthew arrived, and he looked even worse than his photos. He was dirty, he had greasy hair, and his shirt was stained. He was also dressed like a teenager despite being 26. In short, I was far from wetting my panties, but in desperate need of company. I asked him to make some drinks while I chose a movie, and he prepared 2 mojitos before joining me on the couch. We talked a little, and he wasn't particularly smart or very interesting, so I downed my drink, hoping to liven up the party. Thus began a 3-day blackout. According to our dear Matthew, we drank and smoked during the movie, and then went to the bedroom. I vaguely remember being naked in bed, and him looking down at me before turning to slam the door. My phone was dead, so my alarm clock wasn't ringing. After missing a work appointment, My friends grew worried and called my sister when they couldn't reach me, but her phone also went to voicemail. My friends came to my house, but still didn't get an answer, so they called the fire department. Firemen managed to open the main door, but not the door to my apartment. They knocked while calling my name, and I opened the door, wearing nothing but a blanket, staring at them with incomprehension. They concluded I was hungover, and my friends helped me get dressed. And that's when they noticed my body was covered with yellow betadine. I said that I burned my arm the previous day, but there were no signs of any burn, nor do I own betadine. They took my cat and I to one of their houses since I was practically catatonic. I had trouble speaking or even thinking. The next day, my sister picked me up and I stayed with her for a few days. Everyone was convinced I tried to kill myself. I started to complain about pain in my vulva and excess blood loss, so my sister drove me to the hospital. I explained that I may have had unprotected sex while unconscious, and they gave me an AIDS vaccine before taking samples from everywhere. I was advised to file a complaint and redirected to OB emergency care. The next morning, I finally regained consciousness, and my relatives immediately saw that I was a bit more coherent. I had more swabs done, and over the course of a week, I made a series of appointments for blood and urine samples. I also filed a complaint with testimony from my friends and sister. In the course of discussing it with others, especially medical staff and police, the term organ trafficking was mentioned more than once. They think that the guy chickened out at the last minute. Despite my complaint, a bed full of betadine, my underwear being torn off, and the blood on my doors, my attacker got away, and I'll never know what really happened or what he really wanted. I would like to point out that I used to drink and smoke in addition to my treatments, but I've never had a 3-day blackout. I'm pretty sure he put something in my drink. Anyway, it was nice to talk about it. Thank you. This story happened about 2 months ago. My parents decided it would be a good idea to allow my younger sister and I to shop for our own clothes. They thought it would be a good experience for us. So we went to the mall. My parents gave us enough money to purchase at least one outfit. After deciding where we would meet up, they gave us a time limit and some advice on which shops to visit. I was fairly apprehensive about the whole thing. I'm a socially awkward, extremely anxious teen, and I was very paranoid of something bad happening. My sister, who's only a few years younger, was excited. She was more competent with social interactions, so I often relied on that ability. We decided to go to H&M since we were most familiar with their clothes. We took our time, ultimately deciding to return later. When we left the store, I accidentally made eye contact with a random guy who was walking off to the right, and I immediately got a really bad feeling about him. I can't really explain it, but my gut was telling me to get out of there. I started pulling my sister in the opposite direction and noticed the guy turning back towards us. I began panicking, and my sister finally noticed what was happening. I told her to keep holding my hand and quickly started walking in random patterns between the different sides of the mall. I wanted to see if he was really following us and if I could lose him. He followed our every move. He had no bags, no walkie-talkie, no phone. He was dressed in dark clothes that obscured his identity quite well. Luckily, we managed to reach the escalator, ran down the steps. By the time he reached it, we were already running into a family store to be around the employees. We didn't see the guy again, and my parents stayed with us for the remainder of the visit. I'm extremely lucky to have noticed before my sister and I were possibly hurt. I wanted to share something I experienced a few years ago in my previous apartment. I'm sure that place was haunted. Many weird things happened, and despite my best efforts, I couldn't discern any rational explanations. I won't make a list of everything that happened. A lot of it was just common paranormal stuff like feelings of being watched, things moving around, and random footsteps, the stuff we've all heard before. Today I want to talk about the weirdest thing that happened. I've loved paranormal stories for years, and I've read thousands, but I've never heard any that compare to my own. In my bedroom, a light would sometimes appear high up on the wall, just behind my bed. But there was no source. It wasn't a lamp reflection or the moon. It's like the light was in the wall. It's really hard to explain. It was a pale, phosphorescent white and shaped like a rectangle. I noticed it in the first days of living there, and I thought the previous owners had left behind a child's nightlight. But nothing was there. The wall looked completely normal. One night, I showed my mom, but she only brushed it off. It wasn't every night either. Sometimes it was 2 or 3 nights in a row. Then there would be nothing for a few weeks. I used to be too afraid to look at it while lying in bed. It normally appeared 5 minutes after turning off the lights, and it would stay for hours. If I woke up in the night, it was usually gone. One day, I tried covering it with a poster, but that shit moved just next to it. Have you ever experienced anything similar? I've never had a clue what it was. There wasn't anything in the room. I checked many times. I don't have any pictures. It happened before phones were capable of being good cameras. Plus, I was slightly in denial. Hi everybody. I'm writing to share some experiences I believe to be paranormal. It's also important to note that what I say here is only my testimony. I don't have any physical evidence, and you're free to believe it or not. Everything happened in the house I've lived in since age 4, and my grandparents' house, which is like a second home since they're just 5 minutes away. I spent most of my time with them when I was younger. My house was built on an ancient vine culture, but I don't have any more information about the land. My grandparents don't know anything about the past of their house or land. My first experiences began at age 9. Before, I never had any disturbing experiences outside of night terrors, but nothing abnormal. I grew up in a Catholic family, so I was never taught that spirits existed. To me, ghosts were cartoon figures, draped in white sheets with holes cut out for the eyes. I didn't understand that human souls could stay on Earth. Mom's always said good souls go to heaven and bad souls go to hell. I never questioned it. I wasn't even interested. Honestly, I was just a kid with other interests. Mom never believed in the paranormal anyway, and Dad was even more skeptical. We had 4 bedrooms in our house. 3 were on the first floor, and the guest bedroom on the second floor was basically used as an attic. The downstairs bedrooms were mine, my brother's, and my parents'. But then, Mom learned she was pregnant again. As the oldest, I had to move upstairs. The room was large, with a private bathroom, but back then, I still didn't like it. I couldn't sleep for the first 2 years. It always felt like there was something heavy in the atmosphere, something watching me. Sometimes I get very cold in the middle of summer, and it's hot where I live. Until age 11, I spent all of my time in the living room or my little sister's room. Then I finally found the courage to move back into my bedroom, but things got worse. It was only noise at first. Every night when Dad turned off the TV, I heard noises from the living room. The light switch turned on and off. It's loud when used. Dad's gaming chair rolled around, and someone ran barefoot on the hard floor, like kids running around. There were also other strange noises, as if someone would sweep for hours. One evening, someone went up the stairs very fast. It was so clear in the beginning, I thought it was my brother, but when I checked, no one was there. Sometimes, while in bed, I'd feel someone's touch or breath, or sometimes there was a heavy weight on the bed. I was terrified and cried in terror when I felt the hot breath on my face. A lot of things started disappearing too. Some of mine and my sister's clothes, a karaoke mic, Mom's lace shoes, a file with our car papers, and everyone knew it wasn't a joke. The car was being sold. We understood the importance of papers, and our family isn't big on jokes. Mom isn't a believer in the paranormal, but even she admitted to weird noises and doors randomly opening. She once saw my brother running through the garden and called to him from a window, but when he answered, the voice didn't come from outside. It came from his bedroom, and nobody was in the garden. Sometimes there were strange noises on the roof as well, like people with heavy footsteps were running. Now, she also hears loud footsteps coming from my room at 4 a.m. while I'm still sleeping. Maybe I'm sleepwalking, but I don't move furniture or make things fall while I'm asleep. I would notice that things were different the following morning. The first big event happened at my house when I was 14. It was during Eastern holidays, so my siblings were gone for a week, and I was left alone with my parents. It was a sunny afternoon, and Dad was working in the garden while I read a book with Mom on the opposite side. At 4, I went inside via a living room window. Some of the windows were easily used as doors, and I made a peanut butter sandwich. Directly across from where I entered was another window looking out to where my dad worked, and on the left, the kitchen. I went to the kitchen, and when almost finished eating, I heard the garden window open. Mom was going outside, probably to talk with Dad, but I wasn't paying attention. I just closed the peanut butter and went back to my seat, but suddenly, Mom was there, reading a book. How could she have been there when she was on the other side of the garden 10 seconds prior? If she'd passed by the living room again, it would have put her behind me. She would have had to circle the house to enter from the opposite direction to be in front of me. A few years ago, Mom had an accident, and the ligaments in her ankle were badly damaged. She still can't walk really fast. I asked what she was doing, but she seemed confused, responding that she hadn't gone anywhere, and that she had no reason to lie. We ran a test with my brother. If she was by the kitchen window, she would have had to run, but she physically can't. I just don't understand what I saw that day, and it's terrifying. It's also important to note that Dad's friend was trying to sleep upstairs. This was before I moved into that guest room. He later said he couldn't sleep because it felt really bad in there, like he was being watched. And he isn't the type to believe in spirits. He's actually an engineer and a skeptic. A few months ago, we adopted a very calm, very sweet Shih Tzu puppy. He never barks, and he quickly became comfortable in his new home. One day, I wanted to take him upstairs with me since Mom wasn't home, but he got upset the moment we entered my room. He kept looking around and barking, but they weren't aggressive barks. They were frightened barks. He started scratching at the door like he wanted out, but he'd never done that before. He was squealing in terror and only calmed down after we left my room. The next incident happened at my grandparents' house. They have an extra bedroom that used to be my mom's, but she never experienced anything strange in it. I, on the other hand, never could stay in that room. Sometimes, while playing hide and seek, I would hide behind an old table, and it always left me feeling nauseous and cold, even in the summer. Once, while Grandma was sick, I tried to clean that room with a friend, but we couldn't do it. Within 30 minutes, my friend was feeling uneasy. Her head began hurting just a few seconds after I became nauseous. While cleaning, the sponge magically disappeared and reappeared in plain sight 5 minutes later. 2 years ago, when I was 17, I stayed at my grandparents' house for Christmas. But some of the radiators were broken, including the one in my room. That meant I had to sleep in my mom's old room, and I tried reassuring myself I could manage for a single weekend. At 10 p.m., I went to bed planning to read and chat with friends. The ambiance was nice even though the room was freezing. I eventually turned off the lights and went to sleep. But it was the most terrifying moment of my life. I heard scratching noises from inside the walls, and I felt a weight on my bed. During some moments, it even felt like something was lying beside me. And when I finally passed out from sheer exhaustion, I had the strangest dream ever. I was in a room that looked like a little public swimming pool, but there was only one small pool. There was a balcony with bright green plants, small candles, and an old lady lying on a white mat. She was very pale, with long white hair, blue eyes. She was wearing a white nightgown. She wasn't scary, but it felt very strange. The woman called me closer with a sweet voice and took me into her arms. Then she began to cry, saying she was happy to see me, but she had cancer and would die very soon. That's when I woke up. I was crying, but the bedroom was warm, just like in my dream. I felt extremely sad, and even now, I feel sadness. But there's also an intense sweetness. I don't know who this woman is. I've never met her. Well, that's everything. I know this was long, but there was a lot to share, and there's still so much that hasn't been said. If you have any answers or theories, it'd honestly be great to hear. It's truly terrifying to live here. Thanks for listening. I wish you all the best.